Testing, Councillor Chalmers, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you great. Thank you.
Super. Okay, it's 4:30. I'm calling the meeting to order and like to acknowledge that the District of Tofino operates within the territory of the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation, DELEGATIONS. Notice to attendees that the meeting is being re-recorded and will be published on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel. By unanimous consent, I will move that pursuant to Section 15 of the District of Tofino Procedure Bylaw number 1229, 2016 is amended, the May 24th, 2022 regular meeting be held electronically via Zoom and live broadcasted on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel, and that the facility provided for the public to watch and hear the meeting be located at Municipal Hall 161 3rd Street in Tofino, BC. So no objection, that motion's carried. And the agenda has an amendment, so that item 4.1 be moved into the regular agenda. Let's see here. So that by unanimous consent, I'll move that the May 24th, 2022 regular council agenda be adopted with moving 4.1 into the regular agenda. Seeing no objection, motion's carried. Which moves us to the consent agenda. So I will move that the minutes for the regular council meeting of May 10th, 2022 be adopted as amended.
Excuse me, Mr.
Oh, sorry. I'm going on here. I got your great notes, Miss Best. I'm just so we got the consent agenda, which has a bunch of stuff in it, and I've got to remove 4.1. So I removed that. Now I have to move the consent agenda.
4.2 to 4.3 to adopt, yes.
Okay, so just a moment. So I'll move. Here we go. I was looking for the recommendation here. I'll move that through unanimous consent. I'll move that items 4.2 to 4.3 of the consent agenda on the regular council agenda held May 24th, 2022 be received and approved. And seeing no objection, which is carried. And then for the adoption of the minutes for the regular council meeting May 10th, 2022 be adopted as amended to state, and I'm just going to read them here. Give me a minute. This is under the minutes 9.1 Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation regarding dispersed and unauthorized camping and RMI request. And it reads, Mayor Law reported the ongoing work of the ACRD Dispersed Camping Working Group and noted that the group determined TFN Guardians were the appropriate group to help manage the areas through monitoring and education, and that there continues to be needed funding to support the operations of both the Guardians, the RCMP, resource management officers, conservation officers. And the working group is continuing to support and appropriate funding from local governments and the province. So with that amendment, I will move. Maybe I've moved it already. That the minutes for the regular council meeting of May 10th, 2020 be adopted as amended. By unanimous consent, seeing no objection, minutes are adopted. A little convoluted. I believe that's the first time we've had to amend minutes in quite a while. So we have public comment on agenda items. Ms. Best, we have one person.
Thank you, Mayor Law. We do have one speaker. It is Mr. Bobby Lax. So, Mr. Lax, you may, I will allow you to speak now, and you have up to 2 minutes. Please state your name, your address, and the item on the agenda which you are addressing. Just give me one moment here to allow you to speak.
Hi, my name is Bobby Lax, 622 Uwood Road. I'm speaking to this staff report around the decommissioning of the Recreation Commission. Sorry, I lost the agenda. I think it was 10.4. Beth, do you have that information?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, 10.4. Okay. So two things that I was hoping to discuss. The first one is the nature of the bank account. There's approximately about $60,000 in that account. Much of that has been raised by volunteers over the years. I see in the page 48 of the staff report under financial impacts, it speaks to the bank account. No action is required to administer the funds other than changing the authority to approve expenditures to either the committee or a staff liaison, including signing authority with financial institutions. I would encourage council with the strategic priority of enhancing recreation to leave some of the power or decision making with the new recreation committee. You know, they will need to pick up where the commission has left off, many months ago, and having some sort of not autonomous, but some decision making that they can start building on some of the work that has already been done. I think would really help establish them and gain momentum. I worry if, so that is one consideration, that bank account, obviously, lots of work has gone in to that. And the second thing that I was just hoping to comment on is the working relationship between district staff, council, and what will be the new committee, and encourage both council and staff to look at this committee as a partner in terms of, whether it's the Parks and Rec master plan or a much smaller, project, not seeing those meetings potentially as a burden or the organization as, one more thing to do on Wednesday at 6 p.m., but rather an ally in making some of the priorities possible, and creating greater continuity with some of the programming that we have, or some of the initiatives that we've both the commission and staff and council have been working towards.
Mr. Lax.
That's 2 minutes.
Yeah, your 2 minutes is up.
Okay, thanks for the chance.
Thanks for speaking to that. I look forward to hearing more from staff on that one. I think we'll all be assuaged. Okay, moving on. Any other public what we do?
Thank you, Mayor Law. We do have a second request to speak from Mr. Blake Klopfenstein. So Mr. Klopfenstein, I will ask you to I will unmute you now for a moment. And please state your name, your address, and the item on the agenda you wish to speak to. And you should be able to speak now.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi, this is Blake Klopfenstein, resident of 637 Neilson Place. And yeah, I'd like to speak about item 10.2 regarding the 625 Neilson Place proposal. And yeah, I just wanted to thank Mayor and Council for giving my family the opportunity to provide comment on this 625 Neilson Place subdivision and rezoning proposal. We are residents neighboring this property. We have 2 young boys growing up on the street. We recognize these are preliminary concepts for this proposal, but we wanted to make sure council understands that we wanted to provide additional context of our family oriented neighborhood. Neilson Place is a quiet residential neighborhood. There's 8 properties, all averaging about a half acre. There are many families that live here with young children, and we use this street and cul-de-sac as a gathering space to play and to socialize. The current proposal, as we can see so far, really doesn't align with the form or character of our street and would greatly impact families who live here. The proposal seems to over-densify the 0.9 of an acre lot that is really the gateway to our street. Our family recognizes creating new housing opportunities is critical to the growth and vitality of our community. However, we believe that these new opportunities have to be well thought out and congruent with their neighboring spaces, which isn't reflected in this proposal. Our family shares all the concerns brought forward in Peter Thick's report. And
Mr. Klopfenstein, your 2 minutes is up.
Okay, yeah, I was pretty much done. Thanks for listening.
Okay, thanks so much. Okay. Anybody else signed up? Super. Mayor's report. Well, I have only one thing on my mayor's report, and that is that we get to have our new CAO, Miss Tatiana, her first meeting as CAO, and it's wonderful. It's to see you there. So great dad. That's it for my marriage report. I looked up dad jokes. I couldn't bear to say any of them, to be honest.
I got full repertoire if you need.
Going out. No delegations, no correspondence. Presentations report 10.1. We have business license regulation bylaw. I believe we have Chief Baker.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for your time this evening. No formal presentation, just verbal report back on feedback from community since the second reading of the bylaw. We have just a couple of points to bring up for Council's consideration before we move on tonight. So just to start out, we did have first and second reading on the 26th of April. And since that time, we had the reports and the videos from both presentations, committee of the whole and to the regular council meeting have been up on Tla-o-qui-aht. In the month period that has been on Tla-o-qui-aht, there has been only 11 visitors to the site with no comments or feedback provided. We have had two comments from the community. We had one business owner with a short-term rental express concerns about the counting of the numbers of beds within a unit, and I think we've addressed that with the individual, mostly with the concern that perhaps not all guests coming to stay will appreciate the bedding configuration that staff are suggesting. And while we can certainly understand that, our legal opinion that we had received quite a while ago on that matter definitely indicated that there may currently still be some businesses out there, such as the individual that contacted us, that have lawful non-conforming status and may have more than 3 bedrooms and are currently legally operating. And in those cases, they may have different bedding configurations as well too. So those will continue to be allowable as we move forward. New businesses starting out in the short-term rentals will be required to follow the bedding configuration, and perhaps those that let the business license lapse and don't renew it for a period of time as well will then fall under the new regulations as well. We had just on Friday had some feedback from the Chamber of Commerce. I had reached out to them about 6 weeks ago and offered up a draft of the application form that we were suggesting to see if there was any feedback, and also let them know that there was a new business regulation bylaw that was coming before council. Only questions we had come back so far from the chamber was just about what the cost of the fee for operating a business on public property would be, and when that would take effect. And again, so the fee for that would be $150 per business operating on public property. And if the business license bylaw is adopted, Any businesses that are currently licensed under the bylaw would not have to go through that permit process this year. Upon renewal for next year, they would then be getting that permit as well. But new businesses this year would be subject to that portion of the bylaw as well. And then lastly, just to address council's comments from the previous meeting, council had some comments mostly in two areas. One of them was specifically some questions that were asked in the business license application form. The first question was, are there any dangerous goods stored on the property? And the second question being, are there any shipping containers in use on the property? Staff has looked at this a lot, and we've actually just removed those two questions from the application form, and we're comfortable with proceeding without those being included. And the other question from council was regarding the possibility of tiered pricing with regards to short-term rental, specifically one price for the owner being an on-site resident and a different price where the owner was not living on site. And based on the legal opinion that we have received and gone over with council, at this time, staff has maintained the original pricing structure for those business class fees. And that's all the feedback that we've had, and I believe that we've answered the questions. So if there are any questions at this time, of course, please feel free.
Okay, thank you, Chief Baker. I'm going to open up to council for questions. Councillor Thick.
Hi, thank you for responding back to the questions that we had previously. Appreciate that, Chief Baker. And I had a question. I guess every time you read it, you find things that you have to think about. And one of the questions I had for this time was page 21 of our agenda package under section 8. 8, there's A, B, and C, and it's in regard to an operator of an STR, and it says shall ensure that. And in section 8C, I noted that it says is always present. So an operator of an STR shall ensure that, and then it follows from B, a licensed property manager responsible for responding to guest and neighbor concerns. C is always present and available within the district while guests are staying on the premises and can respond to concerns raised by guests. And it goes on to say 24 hours in that sentence. And I'm just wondering, on page 21,
I don't have the full agenda open. I have the business license bylaw itself. So just looking to, okay, yeah, I see it. 8C, yes.
Yeah, so my only concern is that I find 24 hours to be too long. If it's a person's job and there's been some disruption, say at 2 a.m. in the morning, I would say that 24 hours is too long of a time to be dealing with the problem under the present circumstances in our town. So I'm just wondering if there's any consideration whereby we might shorten the time frame that the person responsible will respond to a problem or a disruption or an infraction from something like 24 hours to 2 hours. I know we've received letters in the past where people are, have been woken up at night, and I just wonder whether the 24 hours is too long of a time period for a response in a situation where there seems to be, a major disruption or problem. Maybe it's noise, maybe it's something else.
Certainly, we absolutely, if council would like to amend that and shorten that up, we can do that. The tricky part for sure with that one is just how do we monitor how quickly the responses are? I completely understand the need for some responsiveness, and it's certainly things that we have addressed with some property managers in the past that tend to turn their phones off at 5 p.m. That's not considered acceptable. But I'm open to changing that. I'm not sure that 2 hours would necessarily be sufficient, and I just throw this out there as, let's say, for instance, the caretaker is out for a surf. 2 hours may not be enough time to actually do that. And I do feel as though people should be able to have some opportunity to enjoy their lives while still looking after this. So that's just an example, but I'm certainly open to amending that if that's something that council wishes to do.
Well, I'm thinking in particular of, late night problems as opposed to middle of the day problems, for which we receive many letters or have received many letters in the past about that. So I'm just offering a possible
Let's
change.
let's discuss that within the motion. And council would like to make an amendment. Yes, Councillor Sear.
I just have a question regarding the Chief Baker. I'm just wondering, is in terms of something for the example Councillor Thick was using in terms of noise obviously at those hours past 10 o'clock, where bylaw would maybe involved in that conversation, and also in terms of noise, and RCMP would also potentially be a resource. Would that be correct, or am I just thinking?
It varies greatly. At the peak of the season, the bylaw staff are only available till midnight, and as we know, they're quite frequently engaged with a lot of business on the beaches. So they may not be able to respond to those calls. They certainly can do their best and will prioritize. RCMP, I don't know they obviously are working throughout the evenings, but I think probably many members of the public could tell you that they're quite upfront about having to prioritize, and a noise complaint may not get followed up on until the following day. Tickets can be issued the following day. The bylaw staff can issue a ticket up to 6 months after an infraction. So being responsive immediately, not necessarily possible. In best case scenario, certainly, but.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just mentioning my neighbourhood of Howard Drive last year, there was quite a loud party and someone reported them in the early hours of the morning, and the owner of the property was most upset that the RCMP had been contacted and hand-delivered a letter to everybody in the neighbourhood. So I would say I'd support Councillor Fick. If you're going to have a property manager, it should be the property manager's job. And I think 24 hours is too long. I'm not sure what time frame it should be, but it's 24 hours is definitely too long.
Okay, super. Let's keep that debate. Hold on to that debate. We'll get into that in a second. And any other questions for Chief Baker at this time? Seeing none, would somebody like to read the motion? Then we'll get right into discussion. Perhaps we can amend this.
A minute.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I recommend that the District of Tofino Business License Regulation Bylaw number 1239, 2022 be read a third time.
Seconded by Councillor Steer. Okay, now we can have a discussion. We've got, I think the discussion generally is going to revolve around whether 24 hours is too long.
I can start. I support the notion that 24 hours is certainly too long in my own neighborhood. I can attest to that fact for sure on many occasions. I don't know what would be an appropriate time. Chief Baker is suggesting 2 hours might not be an appropriate time frame, but certainly we're looking at a much shorter time frame. Between 2 and 4 hours, I think would be reasonable, but I certainly think the suggestion of 2 hours is not unreasonable at this point. So hear what the rest of the council might have to say on that, but definitely support the move to a shorter time frame.
Well, let's, who else would like? Councilor Anderson?
I'm just thinking procedurally, if we amend it right now, we're gonna, I think, have to come up with the exact wording that would be in the bylaw. Sure.
I think we just change the time,
Just change.
24 hours to whatever we want.
Okay,
I think now is a good time to discuss it, and we can amend it or not amend it.
I would support that. I just don't know exactly.
Sure. I think it's just, I think Chief Baker is amenable to changing the time and shortening it. I think we have to come up with something reasonable. We have to realize that people have lives. And it's not always in the night, it's in the day, and some people who may be, just thinking here is that who may be running a short-term rental out of their house, maybe at work in the day. And I don't know what a response would be, but I think we do have to realize that people have lives, as Chief Baker said. So 2 hours, 4 hours is pretty short. I mean, we do have bylaw and RCMP to deal with emergencies, but anyway, that's my comment. Go ahead, Councillor Challenger.
Thanks.
And Councillor Chalmers, I see your hand up there.
Great. So yeah, I support the suggestion as well. I was just thinking and want to make clear that is this for only when there's a complaint or in general to have a response? And the reason I ask is I think that most owners of an STR would want to respond quickly as a way of even keeping their ratings up, and that if it was the guest trying to reach them, if a guest is trying to reach an owner and they're taking all day to respond, they'll probably end up with a negative review on Airbnb, for example. So I think that is incentive. But if the issue is actually coming from neighbors, then there isn't that opportunity to perhaps negatively affect the business. So is that what this is more pertaining to? I suppose?
Perhaps I'll just read it here.
Yeah.
The operator of a short-term rental shall ensure that, and there's A, B, and it goes down to C, is always present and available within the district while guests are staying on the premises and can respond to concerns raised by guests, neighbors, or the licensed inspector within 24 hours.
Right.
So the idea here is that.
So it's for all. Okay. Yeah. I might suggest 4 or 6 hours. I feel that even with a work day, if there's usually an opportunity for a break, or there should be an opportunity for a break within that time frame. 6 hours might be is a little long, but perhaps more reasonable as situations that might arise that you can't be checking the phone.
Thank you. Sure. Councillor Challenger, Chalmers.
The other one. I agree that shorter would be great, but I think we're getting a little too prescriptive and kind of micromanaging with how businesses are run. And I would look more at like 12 hours. That way, if it's a noise complaint at night, it's at least being dealt with before checkout the next morning. But it does give, again, people with businesses want to run them to the best so that everybody's happy. So as Councillor Challenger said, we'll be responding to complaints and issues naturally. It's a bit easier for bylaw, RCMP and everything to kind of follow up on, but still maintain within while guests are still there and giving people some space to breathe in life. And you're correct, there's a lot of people that have one vacation rental, it's out of their home, they have kids, they have lives, they want to, go to the beach for the afternoon. Being too micromanaging with the amount of time would be very handcuffing their day to day. So I think within 12 hours, it covers the gist of it, but gives a bit of room.
Councillor Steer. Oh, Councillor McMaster.
I'd say 12 hours is way too long. People could have checked out by the time they get around to it. People are running a business when they're doing an STR, there's certain responsibilities. I mean, people have a life, but if you're running a business, you have a responsibility to that business as well. And it's in a neighborhood, you have a responsibility to your neighbors. So I'd be hard nosed about it. If you want to run an STR, you've got a certain responsibility, and I'd say 2 hours. So.
Councillor Thick or Councillor Steer, sorry.
Yeah, well, Councillor McMaster pretty much, as speaking as someone who's lived beside a vacation rental, when at 3 o'clock in the morning, it has happened over the last 10 years, many, many times, the ability to not disrupt me and my sleep, because I have to work the next day, has been on many, many occasions. It's the responsibility of the business to take care of that issue, especially when it's disrupting the immediate neighbors. So 12 hours is way too long to address something of that nature when the impacts, I know they exist because it's happened to me on many, many occasions. And I've had to take responsibility to go over and ask them to do that. Not willing to do that. And so the shorter time frame by far is the most appropriate response here.
I would concur. And also to say that I see the business license bylaw as putting the onus, as Councilor McMaster said, back on the owner of the business. There's a lot of money that's being made in this business, and with a lot of money comes with a lot of responsibility. And I think that, we've allowed this in every neighborhood, and it may or may not be a good thing. Not often, but I think 2 to 4 hours would be my outside parameters. I just think that at 2 a.m. it's not acceptable to wait for 6 or 12 hours.
Councillor Anderson.
Well, the whole program that we have for STRs is about having somebody living on site. So that's part of that responsibility, is that there's somebody there that is like a caretaker, like an owner. And there are some STRs that don't fall under that category, but right from the start, when we allowed that in several neighborhoods, the idea was that there would be some responsibility by somebody on site, and that it would be comparable to a bed and breakfast in terms of licensing it and use of property. And that's how we've licensed it, and those were the reasons for it. So if there's somebody on site, there should be some responsibility, and there should be an ability to have a fairly quick response.
Just want to clarify that the caretaker or the long-term resident on site is not linked to the STR at this time, so that there's property management companies that do it and have somebody. So
yeah, they may or may not be, but that was the intent of doing it.
That was the intent
when we brought forward the terms of a short-term rental.
Gotcha.
Ms. Best.
Councillor Chalmers, Ms. Best, I think we should wrap it up here.
Thank you. Through the mayor, I'd just like to provide a clarification as I pulled up the bylaw in front of myself as we were going through this. And Councillor Anderson did point out a very important point here. The section you're all referring to is section 7.38 of the bylaw. So for those who are looking at this, and it states that an operator of a short-term rental shall ensure that a permanent resident is on the premises, or, and then B, is a licensed property manager responsible for responding to guest and neighbor concerns, is always present and available within. So it's either or. So either someone's on resident site, or then these our concerns are what you're addressing here. So I do think that point was important to note, that there shall be a permanent resident on site, or a property management company is providing service within a certain time frame. And that's how the bylaw reads.
And it does support a shorter time, either one.
Yeah.
That's good. For clarity, Councillor Chalmers, you have your hand up again?
Yeah, and I feel that council's biggest concern right now is specifically noise complaints at night. So maybe there's an option to address that as a separate point, that noise complaints are dealt with in a shorter period of time, because it is more of a generic issue. So if it is a generic issue that's more of a daytime thing that isn't quite as time pressing, there's a little bit more leeway there that kind of covers off that freedom to have a life, or go out of service for a few hours, something like that. But it seems to me what I'm getting from council is that the biggest concern is noise complaints. So would there be an option instead to add a point there that noise complaints are addressed within 2 hours? Or
I think at this point in time, my feeling is you're throwing it out to all of council. Maybe I think that we have a bit of time is of the essence here to get this bylaw, regulation bylaw through. If we had to add another clause in, it would have to go and then come back. So I think for me, I think we should just pick something a little shorter. It sounds like Chief Baker's okay with something shorter. Everybody's on that route. I would like to do this, and if we have to amend it later, maybe we can amend it to add something else for noise, but I think that would start to get complicated. That would be my opinion.
Yeah.
But Councillor McMaster.
I'd just like to remind everybody we're in Tofino, not Vancouver. If you can't get from one end of Tofino, or from Tofino to Tla-o-qui-aht in an hour to an hour and a half, there's something wrong with it. So I think 2 hours is sufficient. We're in Vancouver, I'd say 4 hours by the time you got across there.
I don't want to get too pedantic about this, but everybody's had the chance to speak. I think we're all in agreement that it should be a shorter time period. Some people feel it should be 2 hours, and some people feel it should be 12. I don't want this to drag on. We do have to get on with this. Just a question, Chief Baker, I'm going to just go out of my way here to ask you for information. Was there a reason behind 24 hours, or is it just a number?
I think it's just a general number,
Okay.
and oftentimes, I mean, historically, I think it's gotten better, but historically, you know, a neighbor or even somebody that's visiting a short-term rental may call the property management or the owner and have questions and just not get any responses whatsoever. And so knowing that many of the visitors are not coming for just 24 hours. And when it comes to noise, those are often happening in the first nights. Then perhaps 24 hours was a means to have the issues addressed while the people were still there. But there's nothing specific about that number.
Okay. Can we just as a council compromise and pick something that's lower but nobody's happy with?
I never believe in compromising. That doesn't satisfy you.
Compromise. I think we should suggest something here for Chief Baker, and then we should carry on. So we go 4 hours, cut the difference.
I was the one that brought it up, so I'll say I would be more at peace with 2 hours myself. So I'm just going to say 2 hours is my suggestion for an amendment, and we can take it or leave it.
Good enough.
Okay, that's your amendment. Just amend it to 2 hours. Seconded by Councilor Master. Comments on this? I think it's a bit short myself. Councilor Chalmers.
I think it's too short, and I would maybe settle with 4, but I wouldn't really want to support anything less than 6.
Okay. Any other comments before I call the question? This is the question on the amendment. So all in favor of 2 hours, raise your hands. And all opposed. Well, that's 19 carried. 2 hours is amended.
And now back to the original. No, we don't have to.
And now we have to, that's the amendment. Any other further questions on the bylaw in front of us? The motion on the table? On the floor, rather. All in favor?
As amended.
As amended.
Through the mayor, I'll just read out the full amendment and motion for the record and for our recording secretary who's in the other room.
Okay.
That the District of Tofino Business License Regulation Bylaw number 1239/2022 be amended to under section 7.38C to replace 24 hours with 2 hours and given a third reading.
Okay. As amended, I think it's we've already voted, so none opposed, motion's carried. Thank you. A nice little exercise in process there. Thank you, Chief Baker.
Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.
10.2, we have permission to proceed for 65 Neilson Place. We have Mr. Peter Thick.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'll be sharing my screen. All right, so hopefully Council can see my screen, which says zoning amendment 65 Neilson Place. This presentation is related to the zoning amendment application that is on the council agenda for this particular day. A bit of background. This application was originally received on November 17th, 2021. Staff have been in communication with the applicant over the last several months, kind of refining the concept and as the applicant worked through various initial ideas. It's worth noting that this report is a permission to proceed report, so it's really just intended to introduce the overall idea. Staff do anticipate some possible minor changes to the overall design should the process continue. However, it's worth noting that the overall density and uses proposed will likely remain the same. The location of the property is 625 Neilson Place. It's on the image that you're looking at. It is within the red dashed lines. It was recently subdivided off of the parent property, which was the 635 and 625 Campbell Street. 635 Campbell Street was one parcel. There have recently been a couple buildings constructed on the property as well that are not shown on this particular orthographic photo, as it is a few years old. So the applicant would like to develop the lot according to the plan that's attached as Appendix 1 to the staff report. So this includes really subdividing the lot into 3 discrete parcels, with each parcel having a separate development on it. The northernmost lot that's proposed adjacent to Campbell Street, it would be a mixed-use development. I believe 3 stories is currently proposed, with commercial retail units on the bottom and condominium units for the 2nd and 3rd floor. The middle portion of the lot would be the existing single-family house on the property, and then the furthest south lot would be 2 smaller single-family lots. So we need to consider a zoning amendment to facilitate this development, and the amendment that's being introduced today would allow the use density and really set up the subdivision for the development that's being proposed. Reviewing the policy that we use to examine these types of applications, generally we're in line with the Vision to Action and Official Community Plan. This property is within the village area of the OCP. There were some initial questions about affordable housing as well as impacts to the environment. However, staff don't feel the environmental concerns are significant in this particular property. There are no development permit areas that address environmental concerns, and there's been significant clearing on the property already. And it's worth noting that last week, the applicant got in contact with staff and noted that they would be willing to offer potentially one of the apartment, or pardon me, one of the condominium units in the mixed use development as an affordable unit, should the application proceed and the development be built out as proposed. The housing mix and density are kind of generally supported by the policies in the housing needs assessment, the land use and demand study. It would be useful to have potentially some frontage improvements. This may come through subdivision as well as building permits or other active transport infrastructure to better align with the multimodal transportation plan. In general, the zoning amendment will increase the density and will vary the form of housing within the area. It'll also introduce a commercial component to the property and the area in general. Some of the planning considerations that staff have identified at this early stage in the process. One of the major concerns is kind of the overall form and character. It's a slightly awkward site layout as the applicant's looking to work around the existing structures on the property. The proposed development will actually require the removal of what is now the caretaker's cottage on the property in order to facilitate the build out of the other structures as proposed. There isn't a development permit area that impacts form and character either. This is on the other side of Campbell Street, so the south side of Campbell Street, and is not under the gateway development permit area as the north side of Campbell Street is. However, should the application proceed, staff are proposing to kind of run the design through the general guidelines for that development permit area. The height and design of the mixed use building may need to be refined. We just have preliminary sketches at this point, but staff have some initial concerns that it may be an overbearing building for that particular section of the road, and will kind of stick out a bit like a sore thumb and sort of impact the both pedestrian and vehicular passenger kind of experience of moving through that area of town. And as we heard earlier in this meeting, there will likely be some impacts to the neighborhood in terms of increasing the density on that particular property. So consultation with neighbors, staff anticipate will be a very important part of this application. And it may be these are slightly more nebulous concerns. We don't have specific policy to guide us, but it may be that the proposed development needs to be refined to fit a little bit better into the existing neighborhood. Affordable housing, this is something that comes up all the time. As noted, the applicant has indicated that they would be willing to consider one of the units in the mixed-use development as an affordable housing unit. This would likely be a price-restricted, resident-restricted unit. Traffic, access, and parking. The applicant has provided a good amount of parking on the property through their site plan so far. However, traffic and access remain a bit of a concern. It's a little bit awkward getting into and out of Neilson Place at the best of times. Currently, with the existing traffic island there, the added density may exacerbate the issue, and so there may be some changes that need to happen in order to facilitate adequate access to the property for this kind of a development. We'll be looking for a traffic impact assessment, so basically a bit of a report from qualified traffic engineers. Should the application proceed, we haven't asked for it at this point, but should the application proceed, that will be a requirement to help us better understand these issues and any mitigation options that might be available. Servicing is kind of the, for better or for worse, what we're starting to call the standard concerns. We'll be looking for a servicing brief. We actually have some more progress on our water model, and we actually have kind of drafted essentially an application sheet for developers to fill out that we can then use to run the water model, which will give us some good information in terms of how it may impact our infrastructure, pressure, capacity, existing assets, all those kinds of things. Community amenity contribution, as noted, there's the potential for an affordable unit to be offered. This time, it's also appropriate for council to consider whether or not to hold a public hearing in association with the zoning amendment. Staff are recommending not holding a public hearing for the amendment. The reason being is that it is in line with the OCP designation for that area. However, due to the potential concerns that have already been raised by neighbors, staff recommend holding an open house after first reading, which will be a little bit more informal, but it'll be earlier in the process and will allow those concerns to be held or heard, pardon me, at an earlier point and hopefully implemented or impact the plan. Typically what staff find with public hearings is holding them after second reading. There's already been so much work done and so much momentum behind the project that it's becomes more and more onerous to change things at that later point in the consideration phase. So the next steps would be further communication with the applicant and refining of the site plan, followed by drafting a bylaw and then bringing it back for consideration of first reading should we move forward today. If there are any questions or comments, I'm happy to speak to those.
Thank you, Mr. Thick. I'll open it up to council for questions for Mr. Thick. Mr. Challenger.
Hi, thank you for the report, Mr. Thick. I had one question, and that was for the three-story building. Could you clarify if those will be units for purchase and will not be rental units? Is that what that is?
That's my understanding at this point. It'd be a stratified building, so they'd be condominiums for purchase.
Okay, and sorry, I actually did have one more question. There was a note about the building, perhaps a three-story building obstructing views. And just as I didn't really take a really good look, but as I was driving by, I wondered if there were additional homes where a view would be obstructed other than those that are already on that property, if you're aware of that.
Not within the direct sight lines. I think what I was trying to illustrate was a three-story building would be, we don't actually have a proposed height for the structure at this point, is my understanding. However, a three-story building would certainly impact the views for the buildings behind it, which are already on the property, but it may impact the views of neighboring properties on Neilson. The benefit for this property is that it actually slopes down a little bit towards the highway. So there is a bit of a gentle slope on the property, which mitigates that impact. And then beyond that, I think the general, not necessarily the direct views from one person's living room, but kind of the sense of entry into the District of Tofino and the views that are often kind of enjoyed from that stretch of the road, both to the north and to the south, would be changed significantly by the addition of a 3-story structure.
Okay, thank you. And I have one more really quick question. It's just that, is the nearest crosswalk it's in front of Tofino Coffee? Is that, if you can remember?
I actually don't, if I'm scratching my head right now, I believe you're correct. I don't think, I'm just kind of trying to visualize that section of the road, and I don't believe there are any other crosswalks. And it's a little bit tricky because that is still Ministry of Transport and Infrastructure, so it's under provincial jurisdiction. However, that may be something that could be appropriate at that point as well, as there's already some congestion concerns in that particular area of Campbell Street.
Okay, thank you.
For Councillor Steer and Councillor McMaster.
Thank you. A couple of questions, and I think we'll probably debate a bit more in the next section. But one of the questions regarding appearance in terms of the visual, that will be addressed in the rezoning process, right? Because there won't be a DPA. Am I right in that? I think that was in the report, but
that's correct. The gateway development permit area, which typically responds to form and character, doesn't actually apply to this property. So it is something that should be addressed at the zoning stage.
Okay, and so in relation to that, because there was no schematics in this permission to proceed, we might see that then if this were to move forward at a first reading. Is that when we might get that kind of first look at the visuals on there?
That's correct. In order to draft a bylaw adequately, we really need to have a solid understanding of what the proposed height's going to be, setbacks, all these kinds of things. And so usually we request some more detailed designs for first reading if they haven't been received by that point.
And then the next one is related to the open house versus public hearing. And while I do agree with the formality of the public hearing and that it's after second reading, so much of the work has been done. This is fairly new with the ability to have this open house instead of, which I think is a great idea. At the open house, when comments and suggestions, et cetera, would staff then come back to council with a presentation from that open house, in essence, a summary of the open house to provide that feedback at that point?
That's correct. The idea would be to be completely candid, it's something that we haven't actually held open houses for a couple of years now. So the idea would be to try and take as many notes and kind of respond to as many concerns and comments as possible, and keep adequate track of the things that are said and noted for council's review at a later date. And that's again, it would be less formal likely than the keeping of minutes that typically takes place associated with the public hearing, but it would be a summary that's designed to help council understand what was said and what the concerns were that were brought forward, similar to a public consultation event for, an official community plan or something like that.
Right. In light of already having a public comment on this, I think and you pointed out within the report that the consultation with the neighborhood is going to be critical for this particular application. So thank you.
Councillor McMaster.
Yeah, Peter, related to Councillor Steer's questions, the open house, is this all that's going to be presented, or will there be some more detail? Because I think that's what people will be looking for.
Yeah, certainly. So the open house, if we do move forward today, and if we are successful moving forward with the first reading, it would be taking place after the first reading, and to kind of reiterate, we would require some more detailed site plans and more detailed illustrations of the proposal in order to adequately consider a first reading and to draft a bylaw. So at that point, we would anticipate having more information to share with both council and the public.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Pick.
Yeah, thanks. The 3 stories in the zoning bylaw, it says that, I think it says even for CD zones, I'm just checking that the height can be 2 stories or 34 feet. So if this is a new CD zone, if it were to become a new CD zone, would that stipulation still apply? 34 feet?
It would depend on the proposed design. The goal of the CD zone, a comprehensive development zone, is to really just respond and draft a zoning bylaw that responds to the site plan that's being put forward, as long as the site plan is something that's supported by council. So, for example, a CD zone is really just a generic term that we use for a kind of a wild card zone that is a spot specific zone or a lot specific zone. So the height could be anything really. It could be, 15 stories, or it could be 12 feet. It really depends on what's being proposed and what can be supported by council. They're a little bit complicated in that way, in that we don't have specific regulations set out, but it does give both staff, the applicant, and council the flexibility to hopefully design something that is appropriate for that particular site.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And the only other question that perhaps hasn't been, well, 2 other questions that haven't been asked, but one is the community amenity contributions. I'm just wondering how that figure of 4,000 suggested might be arrived. I mean, you can barely buy an e-bike for 4,000, so I'm just wondering how it seems rather low. I understand that we're talking within the context of a price restricted unit, but still the 4,000 CAC for this increase in density and use seems rather low to me. Is there any background to how it might have been calculated?
Yeah, there's through the mayor, there is a community amenity contribution guideline that's been adopted by council some years ago now. It does provide a matrix for for calculating what a suggested amenity contribution would be for a change in density. For a change in use, it recommends looking at a land lift analysis, essentially with the district's goal to realize 50% of the total land lift. Mm-hmm. In this case, we're looking at a change, both a change in density and a change in use. However, the more significant aspect would be the change in density. I believe the community amenity contribution suggests that for residential increases in density, 20% of the proposed increase should be considered as affordable housing, as well as $1,000 for each new unit. So we're considering right now we have the zoning permits 2 dwelling units, and we would be considering allowing 10 dwelling units on the property. So it's a difference of 8. However, because they're within the village containment boundary, that community amenity contribution is reduced by 50%. So 8,000 goes down to 4,000. And what would be, I guess, 1.8 units or whatever is, we just kind of called it 1 at that point. So that's how the number was arrived at, based on the matrix within the CAC guidelines.
Right, thank you.
Councillor Chalmers.
Thank you. My question pertains to the public hearing versus an open house. And I really like this direction of an open house where it's earlier on and there's public feedback. But I'm wondering, and I think this is more in a general of all of these, but do we retain the ability to call a public hearing if we feel we need to after, you take the information, we move on to second? Is there any way for us to kind of go back to the public again if changes are made and there's still some sort of uncertainty, or is it really in lieu of?
That's a good question. I haven't actually considered it. My understanding is the provincial changes were intended to hopefully speed up the process for building housing, and the choice needs to be made prior to first reading. So that's kind of why we're doing it now. I don't believe that we can rescind that choice without taking the application back to rescinding first reading. So say we get through first reading or even second reading and council decides, hey, we would like to have a public hearing for this particular zoning amendment application. We would likely rescind whichever readings have been granted at that point, return to the permission to proceed stage, and then go through the process again. That being said, one thing that council could do if that comes up again is hold a another sort of open house style meeting that resembles a public hearing in many ways, and that can provide, there's no limit to the opportunities that council can provide public comment for. There's just one that's required usually, which is the public hearing.
Okay. There's still tools in our toolbox, is what you're saying.
Certainly, and I guess just for council's general information, the kind of the philosophy behind skipping permission to proceed, or pardon me, skipping a public hearing when a zoning amendment is in line with an official community plan. At least my understanding from the provincial level is that there's been significant public consultation typically done in the development of an official community plan, and if a proposal is in line with that official community plan, there's already been a fair amount of public consultation completed. That being said, consulting for a large area plan like an official community plan versus a specific project on a specific site are typically two different things. So it's one of those. It's a useful tool, but also one that staff are wary of as well. And usually, in lieu of a public hearing, if we're suggesting not having a public hearing, we do suggest replacing that with some form of consultation.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Anderson.
I'll just have my comments to be, I think, as the report points out, an increase in density is supportable for that area. I particularly support the residential options. I think the big question for Tofino is it going to be around the commercial use there and the impacts on the traffic? There's already some commercial there that sort of has a fairly large impact on the traffic, people backing onto the highway, etc. So I think the traffic impact assessment is going to be crucial to sort of figuring out how that commercial component of it might or might not fit into the proposal. I would see any uses like restaurants or really high traffic uses in that type of commercial as not being appropriate given the neighborhood and the other traffic generated around that. So I think the other problematic things with the proposal have been identified by staff, but the level and extent of the commercial uses is going to be an important consideration. So yeah, it might be better as sort of office type use or something that lower impact on traffic. I'm not going to make the call on that now because the proposal is still really in its early stages, and I would support it going forward. But I think that commercial aspect of it is going to be the thing that we'll be discussing the most probably.
Mr. Lick, I'm going to turn that into a bit of a question. That was my question. One of my questions was about the commercial aspect, and then I understand that through the OCP we have a 5-year proposed restriction on commercial rezoning in favor of residential rezoning. I'm just wondering, how does that jive with the OCP? Is to create more commercial at this time, and or is that just commercial for resorts type thing?
My understanding, Mayor Law, is that the OCP really prioritizes affordable housing. Secondly, prioritizes market housing, and in third place, essentially, prioritizes the development of further commercial retail or sort of small business opportunities. The lowest priority is what we would call tourism commercial or tourism accommodation. There's a significant latent demand, is our understanding, for commercial retail spaces. The commercial that's being proposed for this particular development would not be what would fall under the general category of tourism commercial. So these are things obviously like resorts or overnight stays or even restaurants. To Councillor Anderson's note, what we would potentially be considering here would be sort of a building that's similar to I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it's adjacent to Cedar Corners, and it currently hosts a surf school and a couple of retail stores, and then has some residential on top. So we would be maybe considering something similar to that. Staff, I guess, on another note regarding commercial on the highway and commercial in that area, staff feel that Neilson Place kind of provides a reasonable ending point for commercial on that side of the highway. There's already, from shelter over to the Gateway live work units, going to where the Tofino vet is now located, and then across to where Surf Sister is located. And then there's that's kind of the end of the commercial on that side of Campbell Street at this current point in time. However, it would not be completely out of character for within the next 10 to 20 years for additional commercial development fronting onto Campbell Street to find its way onto those other properties. So that's at this point, that's kind of staff's opinion and why we're happy to consider commercial development through this particular application, though to Councillor Anderson's point, it may be something that is challenging for the neighborhood as well as something that is worthwhile for council to take a close look at.
Thank you. Why don't we go around and just give our opinions on it so that Mr. Thick can hear us, and we can, if he has another, we have questions to clarify, we can do that, and then we'll go to the motion. How's that sound?
Sure.
Councillor Challenger, go ahead, and then Councillor Chalmers, Councillor Spear, go around the room and I'll finish up.
Okay. Great, thanks. So I do appreciate that the proposal is generally supported by the OCP and other documents like the housing needs assessment and such. So I am in favor of the recommendation to grant permission to proceed. Also in favor of holding the open house after first reading, understanding that there would be more detail for the public to see it and then have opinions on that rather than kind of speculation at this point earlier in the process. I definitely share all of the concerns outlined in the staff report, and to elaborate, I agree with the conversation that's just come up about the commercial space and would like to understand more what might be allowed in there versus what could be. I do agree that there's a shortage in commercial space for small business, but agree that something like a restaurant or high tourism might become dangerous with traffic there and really change things for families living in the neighborhood. I'm really happy to hear that the applicants have reached out to say that they are open to affordable housing, providing a unit for that, because that was going to be a must for me, for sure. And lastly, I would just strongly encourage some of those multimodal transportation strategies that were already in the report, things like adding a sidewalk, bicycle amenities, EV chargers. And yeah, I think that's, I'll leave it at that for now. Generally in support.
Super. Can we go to you, Councillor Chalmers?
Sure, I am in support of moving forward at this time, and I echo everything that Councillor Challenger said to the word. It's almost like you were reading my notes. So same concerns. So I'll just say there's nothing new to add as Councillor Challenger hit all of them.
Super, thank you. Councillor Steer.
Great, yeah. Thank you, Councillor Challenger, for bringing up all those knocked off all of the main points. The big one for me was the traffic concerns. Frankly, the change to the character of what I know is a family neighborhood. So the commercial use of there is something that I have concerns around, and it's been addressed there. So I won't reiterate what Councillor Challenger has brought forward, but those points certainly are all there. And the council report from Mr. Thick laid out those concerns quite concisely. So thank you.
Super, Councillor McMaster.
Yeah, like everybody else, I think Councillor Challenger did a great summary, so I have no concerns at the moment with going to an open house in first reading.
Thank you, Councillor Thick.
Yeah, as mentioned, I have trouble with the 3 stories and the commercial uses. After Councillor Anderson brought that up, I too feel very dubious about that component. I would like to see a public hearing, as you suggested. And I think, as Councillor Steer mentioned, the access and egress is a big concern for me. With, I don't know, there's no crosswalk there. It's just very difficult entry and exit. So the points have been brought up, and I just reiterate those things. Thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
Yep, I think I made most of my points, and I would agree with Councillor Challenger as well. This has stated it very well. Yeah, so I would support proceeding, and I would support the open house and foregoing the public hearing.
Super. I agree with everybody in the room. I think it's too high. I do think that the 3 stories there would be quite high, noting that the surf shop, the surf school we talked about was 2 stories, and that's quite high. So I think that's a real issue for me. I also have issues with the commercial aspect. I have a couple issues with the commercial aspect. One, of course, is the impact on the neighborhood. Certainly, absolutely no restaurants or tourist commercial for me. Absolutely not. And I'm tempted to say no commercial simply because we don't have the housing in Tofino to support the commercial zoning that we have. So we're trying to get ourselves out of a hole and creating a deeper hole. So that does trouble me, noting that it's mentioned in the OCP. So those are pretty strong concerns. I am quite happy with the affordable housing offer. I'm quite happy with the loss of STR use for the other 2 properties. And I'm quite happy with the 4 units of strata. So I'm happy with a lot of it, but I think for me personally, if the concerns are strong enough that if it did come back with some changes, I would go again. I would be not in support. So I'm going to support it now. Support it going through to the open house. But we'll see.
A point of clarification, some of us have mentioned open house and some of us have mentioned public hearing.
This is an open house.
Open house is what we're speaking about. Okay.
After the first reading.
After the first reading.
So just to be clear, so council is fairly unanimous and pretty strong on this one. So to support staff's recommendations for all of the staff's concerns, I understand, as well as some concerns with the commercial specifically. So I think everybody mentioned that. So how was that, Mr. Thick, for feedback?
Thank you, Mayor Law. That's great.
Super. Okay.
That staff proceed with further review of the 625 Neilson Place zoning amendment application.
Second by Councillor Thick. Any further comments? All in favor? Motion is carried.
And that the manager of community sustainability be authorized to schedule an open house following first reading of the proposed bylaw in lieu of holding a public hearing, as the proposed development is consistent with the District of Tofino official community plan bylaw number 1290/2021.
Second by Councillor Anderson. Any further comments? All in favor? None opposed, motion carried. Super, thank you.
May I request a 2-minute break?
Thanks. You have that privilege. So we'll recess.
Let's use the reason.
It's my turn.
Is there something happening?
Oh my goodness.
Sorry?
Is there something happening?
No.
It's just like
I didn't make.
when there's a recess, then everybody leaves.
Oh, my bullets didn't translate. That's too bad.
I almost choked. I was gonna cough myself through there. Drank some coffee, went down the wrong way.
Well, you did some pretty good
Councilor Towers, can you hear us?
Sorry, I didn't realize my video was off still.
Can you hear us? Yeah.
Yes, I can.
Okay.
We'll reconvene. Okay, we'll reconvene.
You want to call me up or just want to?
What's that?
Call the meeting to order
You
back.
already got it right there. Come on. So, okay, we're moving on to Recreation Advisory Committee. We have a report from Ms. Best.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor Law, and hello, council. I will be presenting from the podium today.
I gotta say, is this the first time we've had a podium presentation since we got back? Is it?
Mr. McPherson did the first one.
This one?
The CAO presentation of the organizational review.
Right, I just feel
So
this
this
is
is your
special.
first.
Yes.
It's Nikki's first.
It's Nikki's first. I just kind of feel like this is a special moment. I don't know. Anyway.
Thank you.
All things.
I'm here for a good time, not a long time, so. Oh, yeah, well, I'm here because Ms. Alicia Bergman will be back just at the end of this year, so.
Yeah.
And I'm excited for her and it'll be great. So while I've been here, I've been tasked with various projects for other departments and considerations and wish list items from other departments, and for the Recreation Advisory Committee and moving from the Recreation Commission review is one of those things that has landed in the Corporate Services Department. And I will be presenting where we are today. One moment, please. It was working a second ago. I might have to do this over here. Okay.
Need an assistant.
Let's see here. Because there's a few of these open for some reason. Okay. Sorry, Councilor Chalmers. Interesting. I would like the public to see this presentation, so we aren't just doing it in here. Councilor Chalmers, can you see the PowerPoint presentation?
I can now. I also see your notes.
Okay, great. So moving forward, this is just a brief timeline overview of where we're at today. So in Q4 2021, I was requested by the Recreation Commission to attend a meeting and review the bylaw and the existing process. So Corporate Services attended, leading to the TRC review and policy work leading into the early 2022. Council did not appoint new members to the TRC in anticipation of this review. Then we moved into Q1 2022. We had a committee of the whole meeting, a discussion with council, and council provided direction. Council presented findings at the committee of the whole, staff presented findings at the committee of the whole session, and the discussion with direction to proceed with moving to a group called the Select Committee of Council and using a hybrid functionalities as an advisory group. And now we're moving into Q2 of 2022. We are presenting the new committee structure for the Recreation Advisory Committee. We'll be speaking about the recruitment process as well as decommissioning the TRC, which is the Tofino Recreation Commission, which is enacted by bylaw and not by appointment of council. And thirdly, we'll be talking about appointments, committee orientation, training in Q3, and what an inaugural meeting of the committee could look like should the terms of reference move forward today.
Sorry, may I interrupt, Ms. Best? It's not
Yes.
moving forward. We're still on the title page.
Oh, apologies. I think I'll have to sit at my desk here and not the podium, unfortunately.
So disappointed.
This is what happens when you are the tech support and presenting at once. See here. Sorry about that. You missed my great infographic of the timeline.
Darn.
Okay, can you see the timeline now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So now we're moving into the proposed recreation committee. So the general purpose, as stated in the terms of reference and the council report of the committee, is to provide advice and make recommendations to council on matters specifically related to recreational services and facilities within the municipal boundaries of the District of Tofino. Key elements of advice and recommendations to council should be regarding programs and services, recreation and leisure policies, proposed or in development plans for parks, playing fields, and play parks when referred by council, capital expenditures for parks, trails, and facilities through the budget process, and other matters that are directly referred by council. The membership of the proposed committee is to be up to 6 to 7 voting members. Specifically based on council's feedback, we've listed here 1 member of council to serve as chair with 1 alternate, 1 member from the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation to be appointed by their organization, 1 member representing local youth who shall be under the age of 19. And please note there's an asterisk there because under further consultation, we've noted 19 and under is a better age to represent youth as previously proposed, which was 25 in the terms of reference and the council report. So staff intends to change that number to 19. So if the terms of reference is recommended as is, we do not need to make an amendment because the number should read 19. 1 member representing outdoor recreation, which could be parks, trails, beaches, 1 member representing indoor recreation, which is facilities and programs, and 2 members at large who reside within the municipal boundaries of Tofino. An important note here as well is that there is welcome membership for non-voting representative members, and that is called ex officio. And ex officio is a Latin term used for governance bodies that means by way of another office, means that you have a stakeholder opinion, you may have some input, but you shall not vote. And that key difference allows us to consult with important stakeholders in the community, but still allow the membership of the community of the committee itself to make the vote. So it's a way to incorporate feedback and involvement, engagement of important groups, but they will not outvote and possibly run into conflict, which could be perceived when you have stakeholder groups involved in advisory committees to council. So the non-voting representative members could be, of course, district staff and the secretary, so they would be supporting roles. Then also other membership roles could be Tourism Tofino representatives, Tofino Long Beach Chamber of Commerce representatives, and a representative from the School District 70. One of the things council requested was to ensure that the group could create subcommittees or working groups. So the committee may establish, as stated in the terms of reference, any subcommittees or working groups from time to time to assist in the committee in the performance of its responsibilities. Subcommittees or working groups may only address committee responsibilities and be in accordance with the district master planning related to parks, trails, and recreational facilities. It's important to note, and you'll notice the spinning plate icon I put there, that subcommittees and working groups must not impact or alter district staff job duties, roles, and responsibilities, because we do have a set work plan and we want to ensure that a sub-working group is not directing staff on their duties. So should the terms of reference be approved as is or slightly amended, staff could then establish the committee by beginning the application and appointment process. Staff would then return to council to present the applications to appoint members. Then staff would need to formally repeal the Tofino Recreation Commission bylaw by way of introducing a sunset clause. And fun fact for anyone wondering why we would do that is that if you want to amend a bylaw or repeal a bylaw, you must do it by bylaw. So council can't just say out loud, they repeal a bylaw. We must introduce either a sunset clause, which is stating that the bylaw will no longer be in effect by a certain date, which is a legal instrument, or just stating that once a commission has been, or a committee has been formed, that the Recreation Commission bylaw is no longer valid. And lastly, with the committee provided, when the committee is appointed, the staff will be providing orientation and training for the inaugural meeting. And then the committee can then set their annual meeting schedule, determine how often they would like to meet, and then beginning learning and interpreting the district master planning documents before they begin their advisory functions. So that brings us to the final recommendation. There are 4 here, and I placed them all together because they kind of fall in a process. So it's that pursuant to section 142 of the community charter, a select committee of council titled Recreation Advisory Committee be established, and that the proposed terms of reference for the Recreation Advisory Committee attached to Appendix A to the May 2022 council report be approved, and that staff be directed to begin an open call for Recreation Advisory Committee member applications for the month of June 2022, and that staff be directed to prepare a sunset clause amendment bylaw for the Tofino Recreation Commission Establishment Bylaw number 731/1996. And yes, that is when that Recreation Commission was created. So that's all I have for today, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Bess. It's a lot of work. I appreciate that. I'll open it up for questions for Ms. Bess. Questions from council about the Councilor Anderson and Councilor Thick.
My question is about ex officio membership. I'm wondering, there's some suggestions there. Does council need to decide on where that membership will come from at this point? Or would the committee decide sort of that they want to work with, I don't know, School District 70 for a term because there's something to discuss with them, and then that membership would go away? So I guess my question is, would that ex officio membership change over time based on what the committee is doing and what their work is? Or does council sort of decide that and it just stays that way?
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. The terms of reference ultimately determines the membership. So should council only want certain ex officio membership to be listed, we can do that today to add or remove. There is also the subcommittee working group function as well. So should committee find that there's certain topics that need to have additional support through working groups, that's fine. But the terms of reference right now just lists specifically the School District 70 Tourism Tofino and the Tofino Long Beach Chamber of Commerce as the three parties that are listed separately. Staff, I do believe, have to support this committee to provide the administrative functions as well as the liaison. So those are just the three groups. So we're happy to amend that if council chooses to today, but.
Okay. Super. Councillor Thick. Question.
Yeah, thank you. I had a question. I'd like to discuss one part of the terms of reference, and I wondered if now is a good time or just to make a comment or ask.
This is for questions from Ms. Bess. So questions for clarity, and then at the end, because it's new, we'll do the same thing we did last time, and we'll have a little discussion roundtable before we get right into the motion. How does that sound? So you have a question for Ms. Bess. It's good to ask right now.
Yeah. So when is the right time to discuss the terms of reference? May I ask a question about that to you? Or yeah. So one of the concerns I think that I have, and this is in consultation with some members in the committee who are there now, but I'm wondering about the concept of I think it was referring to the beach parks and trails component of the committee. And up to this point in time, that hasn't been, I don't know if it's been under the terms of reference, but that commission at this point really doesn't deal with many of those issues in beach parks and trails. And as I began to think about this a bit more, I wondered whether the beach parks and trails portion of the terms of reference would not be better suited under, I understand in our reorganization, we're going to have a parks planner or potentially a parks planner. And that would sit under public works, as I understand. So my question is, would it not follow that the parks and the trails, which is a very big area, would it not fit better underneath the park planner, and that would sit under public works, and indoor recreation would just be more streamlined? I think the reason I'm thinking that is not only are they both big areas in going forward in the next 10 years, but if we are going to really initiate and grow this concept of the recreation center in our community, then I think it is going to take a lot of energy. And I would love for the Recreation Committee to have their eyes more focused on that. If we already had a rec center, we weren't trying to embark on such an endeavor, perhaps encompassing beach trails and parking would be suitable at this time. But I just see that as a very big endeavor. So I'm just wondering about parsing those two parts of the terms, considering whether it might be better parsed into two separate committees. That's my question. Possible?
Can I just make that a question, a little general question for Ms. Best? Ms. Best, can you describe what the committee as presented would do for parks and trails and in that capacity to
Yes.
council?
Yes, thank you. This is an advisory committee. So really, this is about seeking input to provide back to council. And much of the advisory function is be directed from council. So should council be entering into a new park or wanting to look at trails or even considering use of beaches, this would be a great opportunity for council to say, well, wait, maybe we need more input from the Recreation Advisory Committee and then defer that to the committee. This is just the parks, trails, beaches mentioned is actually just specifically on the membership listing. And so that's just saying it'd be nice to have a representative from someone doing outdoor recreation. It would be nice to have someone who's involved with indoor recreation. That way, it's not always indoor recreation focused. You always have a member or someone in a seat that is going to allow the community to have a broader perspective of considering recreation programming. So it's not so much about looking at parks, trails, beaches, and those things. It's about looking at having a very well-rounded group of individuals to provide advisory functions to council. And the problem that you see in other organizations and communities is that they can get very one-track minded, and allowing your community groups and advisory groups to be very open-minded, broad, and very multi-diverse with age and background does allow for a better advisory function. And if there is something that needs to get granular with parks, trails, beaches, this committee is totally given the power to create a subcommittee or a working group. That could be something that's holding a community working group session on something that is really specific to recreation center, so they can focus deeply on more deep dive projects and subjects. But mostly the mention of parks, trails, beaches was in parentheses just under the membership listing. So I would not like council to think that's too granular and too specific of what this is really supposed to be doing. This group is supposed to, and designed by function, to advise council, to give the council a broader perspective on the decisions that they're going to be making. Does that help?
Yes, I understand that. I guess I just think back on to the time when we did have a Tonkin Trail Committee, and I could see that that committee, even though it was made redundant, could actually have grown into a fully functioning committee that oversees not just that trail, but many trails in this community. And I see it as a very, I see them more as two separate entities in mind. I see where you're coming from, but
And to add to that, that's a great point, because if this committee is finding they're spending a lot of significant time on one particular subject, or they feel like they're not able to address things that are important, that is a great opportunity for that committee then to advise council, maybe we do need another working group, maybe we do need another committee or another functional process here. But until we have something like this in operation, and I think that was the main goal here, is to have the Recreation Commission reviewed, see where it was not functioning, see what we could do to amend that, and get something put in place that actually will be meeting and providing clear direction to council in the process that really works for everyone. So I think at this setup, and this actually membership list was reviewed across other organizations in the Community of the Whole report. The appendix provided was other recreation advisory function groups across other municipalities. So looking at all of those terms of references helped build this one we have here today. So really, the terms of reference is completely within council's purview to amend and adjust as they feel needed today. There is no ownership on whether we should include parks, trails, beaches here at all, if that's something that should be considered, if someone should represent that in the considerations for this committee.
That helps. Thank you. Councillor Steer.
Thank you. Very much appreciate this, Ms. Best. I was a 10-year member of the Rec Commission and been on there for a long time, and so took a great interest in the report itself. And seeing that it's shaping up into an advisory committee, and I appreciate the broad representation that had been alluded to. My question is around, and it's going to seem a little strange, but one of the old functions that was many of the fun community events that we used to do pre-pandemic, Breakfast with Santa, Halloween Howl, Canada Day, et cetera, and with the structure of this, just so that I'm clear, the ability for this advisory, in essence, could in fact a subcommittee could be established to, or would this fit into our those particular events? Would those fit into our events? We have a person specifically there that would then take charge of that, and because historically it was not just a community events, but some of those were fundraising as well, and that no longer may be necessary. So I'm just wondering, would the ability of the advisory committee then be to say, we think these community events, that recreation in essence, in some ways, would then be the purview of our events coordinator, I think that's the title, or would there be some way that the advisory would be involved, or the ability to create a subcommittee? Do you know where I'm going with all of this?
I understand the history. I did take me a little time to understand the Tofino Recreation Commission did hold events, did plan events, did fundraising. However, this is not what this function and this group is for. This is for advisory of council, and we do specifically have an events, arts, culture, and heritage committee. So we wouldn't want to impact the mandate of another existing committee, as well as staff roles. However, the committee is advisory, so they could make recommendations to council. Council could take those recommendations and direct each committee to do things, or hand off to each committee. And if there are very willing and excited members of the Tofino, the Recreation Advisory Committee who want to hold events and do things, that's completely within their rights. However, that will be separate from the advisory function of this group. And that's just, I think, where some of the lines over time could be blurred from the commission to what an advisory committee could be. So this is what we really want to nail down and keep clear here. So we don't impact staff roles, we don't impact an existing group. And we already have a group that's well established that's dealing with and administering events in our community. So I think that's an important place to keep that.
Right, and just to follow through on that, they were a cheap labor force. We were a cheap labor force. My concern, of course, would be that without the follow through from sort of those events, which I personally believe were incredible events for the community, may get lost in the ether, and just finding a place that they will be able to sit and that they'll be able to be brought forward post-pandemic. Well, I hate to use the word post-pandemic, but so that we do find a place for them, that we get those back online, because I do believe we've been lacking in community events in the last couple of years that really did draw the community together. So I totally appreciate the advisory capacity of this committee. I just don't want to lose sight of where those special events.
And that's a great comment too, because when drafting this, there was a lot of discussion with staff. There was a lot of discussion about the history and the ongoings of the commission itself and how important the events were, and not to lose that momentum. And I think Councillor Anderson mentioned that last meeting. So that was a big consideration. And that's why we did include that working group subcommittee function. But that is really specifically about what this group is supposed to be doing. So if there is a function or subcommittee that wants to address or consider what are the events that are important that should be referred to somewhere else, or what are the events that should not be lost and that are important historical, landmark moments for the community that maybe we should reignite, but maybe not we should put them on a placard somewhere and provide that to somewhere else that could do that work for them. Because the thing that I did put in here as we drafted this is that some of these are working groups. They're meant to be doing the work. And so if there is people that have the energy that want to do that kind of work, and they don't have to be on the Recreation Advisory Committee, working groups can be other members of the community that want to do work. It's just important that that working group and that subcommittee is aware of the responsibilities of that group in of itself and doesn't impact or impede each committee or staff responsibilities and roles. And that's something that will be expressly covered in the orientation for the new committee to make sure that everyone understands what lanes we're all going to stay in, so we can make sure that things function really at a high functionality moving forward. We just don't want to cross paths and step on toes, but we certainly want things to continue that are important in the community.
Thank you. So I have a question, actually, Councillor Thick.
Yeah,
You can ask
oh,
one
I'm
question.
sorry. Yeah, just,
I have a question.
Yeah.
Let me ask first.
sorry.
You ask a question, I get to ask, then you have to answer it. Okay, question for you. I just thought of it. Now it's gone. We had a comment from the public, Mr. Lax, question specifically about the finances. And I maybe now's a good time. Could you address that question? What happens with the money and how does the advisory committee interact with those funds going forward?
The terms of reference is silent on determining financial decision making. That could be amended should that be it. But again, when it comes to a committee of this stature, they would make recommendations on how to disperse funds to council, and council would approve that recommendation, just as each committee does right now. So as we know, each committee awards funds and grants, monies, makes a recommendation, as well as the standing committee for the council grants made a recommendation to council on how the funds should be expunged or used. So that would be something that the committee could look at. However, I did not dive deeply into the financial history of this organization. I appreciate Mr. Lax's interest and giving me a financial amount, but I did want to defer to our CAO, who also has the background of the setup of this account here, so she can speak to that more clearly.
Thank you. The Recreation Commission bank balances have always been accounted for and absorbed into the District of Tofino financials. So they're reported out on an annual basis based on the balance at the end of the year. I don't believe there isn't a need to reference the funds in the terms of reference. However, council can direct staff to restrict those funds in any manner they wish. If they were to remain as restricted funds, similar to how when the Tofino Housing Corporation wound up, understanding that was a corporation of significant, we restricted those funds for affordable housing only. We can certainly restrict the bank balance for the Rec Commission for recreation or parks and recreation programs, culture, whatever council wishes. We also don't need to make that decision this evening. We can bring that back at a later date for further discussion through future financial reports.
Super, and just a follow-up question, because I know that Mr. Lax did point this out specifically, and it was about I got the sense that the concern was that the funds would be the perception was that the in the terms of reference, the staff liaison was somehow taking the decision making away from the Recreation Advisory Committee. I didn't read it that way, so I just wanted to. I don't read it that way. I just want to make sure that Mr. Lax gets a good answer. That's not actually what that means.
Yes, that relates to a second comment I'd like to make, and just remind council that we did just introduce a new organizational structure. So this is an opportunity to invest more resources through the advisory committee and through the organizational structure on recreation. If we limit the terms of reference too much to not allow for, say, parks, trails, and what have you, then we limit the capacity to support the initiatives through recreation, like we want to have more focus on. The funds won't be expended or the decisions made regarding those funds won't be solely the responsibility of the manager of community programs. Hope I'm getting that right. Certainly, those funds were raised to the Recreation Commission, and we could lean on the support of the advisory committee to to determine how those funds could be allocated. However, we need to ensure that those do align with the plans that we do have in place. We don't want those decisions to impact the capital planning or the programs that we have planned over the next 5 years, for example.
Thank you. Perfect. Now, Council Sick.
Yeah, well, mine was the same question.
There you go.
Because it was expressed by more than two people of the previous commission that because it was a little bit confusing in the report, because here on page 1 it says any remaining duties, funds, and responsibilities to district staff under the manager of community programs and the director of community services. But then on the next page, no action is required to administer the funds other than changing the authority to approve expenditures. I hope I'm getting this right in saying that I think what the committee's concern, or the commission's concern, was that the money that was raised could go to such things as Kids Access Fund and equipment, and the sort of maybe a little bit more of the nitty gritty, rather than getting put into something that they couldn't see the fruits of their labor. So I'm just expressing the same thing as was said earlier, and you said as well. Yeah, I do think it's a really small but important one. So thank you.
Sure, Ms. Etienne's got an answer.
Sure, I can further elaborate that council's priority is to expand recreation programming, not just focus on capital. So if there is staff will be looking at ways that we can invest further into recreation programming, parks, facilities, capital expenditures to further along the priorities of council. And we could, using the work of the advisory committee, trying to figure out where those priorities lie and then investing those funds appropriately.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Councillor Steve.
I think it's been answered. As you know, in
my hammer here.
Yeah, I know, specifically with the Kids Access Fund, because I was involved in the creation of it, and it was a very important part of the program. I think you've answered it in that in essence, that would be secured through the programming and that advisory capacity to continue on in those veins. So I think it has been answered. If I'm incorrect, I'll talk to you later.
Okay, any further questions from council before we go to the motions before us? I see none. Then who would like to read the motions? Councillor Stewart.
Oh, there's a lot. That pursuant to section 142 of the Community Charter, Select Committee of Council titled Recreation Advisory Committee be established, and that the proposed terms of reference for the Recreation Advisory Committee attached as Appendix A to the May 24th, 2022 Council report be approved, and that staff be directed to begin the open call for Recreation Advisory Committee member applications for the month of June 2022, and that staff be directed to prepare a sunset clause amendment bylaw for the Tofino Recreation Commission, established bylaw number 731/1996.
Seconded by Councillor Challenger. Any further comments?
I'd just like to make a clarification that I may have a typo, and it should be Appendix 2, not A, in the second resolution, because that is the terms of reference.
I meant to say that.
Sorry, my apologies.
Appendix 2.
Yeah, so it says a friendly amendment. You don't have to read it again.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Awesome. Seconded. Sorry, go ahead, Ms. Etienne.
Further to that, the terms of reference does state page 25 as it is attached.
But that was clarified with Ms. Best. It's actually.
Yeah, I think, it definitely is going to be 19.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Awesome. Do we have a second here? Did somebody second?
Yeah.
Councillor Challenger. Okay, so any further comments? I have one before we call the question. I just like to say that tremendous amount of work, and this council is dedicated clearly to improving recreation in Tofino, and that this is intended to make this committee work better and in all things. So that is the way I read it. That's my hope and intention, and I think council's all behind that. So good work. That's all I have to say. All in favor? None opposed, motion is carried. Thank you.
One more comment about that one.
It's too late.
I
can't. It's
on behalf of council, it's okay, I would like to write a letter of thanks to all the members of the committee and just encourage them to consider applying for the other committee.
No, it's not okay. Can we break protocol? That's a whole other motion. You want to make a motion later, you could do it under
This
business initiated by council.
would that happen anyways?
Do it.
Not sure.
It won't. A recommendation is fine to that effect, and staff will.
Okay, let's make a simple recommendation. Encourage the commission members to apply.
And we can write a letter of thanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
And thanks.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Okay, we have 2022 election procedure amendment bylaw number 1204.02 2022. Now, we don't have a report. Is that right?
No presentation, but I'm happy to speak if council would like to. Essentially, I would have put this on the consent agenda. However, it's not appropriate to put bylaws in the consent agenda, so it is now your only regular agenda. But this is just a housekeeping requirement that we must adopt our election bylaw before July.
Perhaps what I'll do is I'll look to council. Does council, would council like a verbal report, or should we go right to the motion?
Should just go straight to the motion.
Perfect.
The report was pretty good.
Councillor McMaster, you go ahead.
Okay, recommend that the District of Tofino election procedures amendment bylaw number 1204.02 2022 be introduced and given first, second, and third reading.
Second by Councillor Challenger. Any further comments? All in favor? None opposed, motion is carried. Bylaws, business and issued by council members. We have committee and external appointment verbal reports. I believe we have one. Councillor Thick.
I attended my first Tourism Tofino board meeting today as a representative of the District of Tofino, and at that time I think it was announced and perhaps well known by those in the room, but that the executive director, for Tourism Tofino will be leaving as of June 30th, and there will be a search for a new executive director in the next month or 2 months. And there was some good discussion actually there between the Chamber of Commerce and the board members, who are, of course, really thinking and looking and wanting to hear what we can do to support them and they can do to support us in terms of housing for seasonal workers and seasonal workers that are becoming year-long workers. So yeah, it was a really good discussion. It was a really good meeting to have for the first time in person. So very good.
Thank you. The other reports from council? Seeing none. Now, moving on to 12.2, we have the minutes of the 2022 Council Grant Standing Committee.
I can offer, just as I chaired that meeting, I can offer a brief verbal report and then open that up for discussion if council would like. So I would like to, just on behalf of the council and the committee, to thank all of the organizations for your applications. I think it's really wonderful to see a broad range of important projects and initiatives happening within the community, and for council to be able to support them through the council grants process. This year, the total requests for grants were beyond the budget, and upon careful review of the applications, the proposed amounts that were deemed eligible and supported by the council grant policy. So many of the applications that were received were partially eligible based on the information provided in the breakdown of budget. So ineligibility is included, but we're not limited to things such as administration, requesting funds for core funding and staff training. And so the numbers that you see listed on the agenda reflect that. And we ended up then with a remaining amount of $10,875. And so we're recommending that a second call for applications to allocate the balance of that.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Councillor Steer?
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
Were the unsuccessful applicants, were they made aware of the deficiencies within the application? And
Yeah, so staff would respond to each application, letting them know the reason that they were not eligible or that they did not receive the funding. And so all of the applicants will be able to apply again in that case as well.
Excellent. Well done. There's no questions from council. Let's move on to the motions. Who would like to? Councillor Anderson, go ahead.
Okay, I'll read it. I'll move first that the minutes of the 2022 Council Grant Standing Committee held May 16th be received.
Second by Councillor Thick. All in favor? None opposed, motion carried.
And I'll move that pursuant to the council grant policy, the committee recommend to council funding the following applicants for 2022. Coastal Queer Alliance, 2,250. Friends of Clayoquot Sound, 2,000. Tofino Community Food Society, 2,175. Tofino Saltwater Classic, 2,000. Wickenanish Community School, 2,500. Strawberry Island Marine Research, 700. West Coast Community Resources Society, 2,500. Yeah, that's the end of the recommendation. There's another bullet there with nothing beside it.
Bullet. Seconded by Councillor McMaster. Further comments? All in favor? None opposed, motion carried.
And third recommendation that the District of Tofino open a second call for applications for the 2022 council grants to allocate the balance of $10,875.
Seconded by Councillor Thick. All in favor? None opposed, motion carried. Excellent. 12.3. Acting mayor's schedule. I'm just going to recommend that the acting mayor's schedule for 2022 be amended as follows: June, Councillor Challenger; July, Councillor Anderson. I have a second by Councillor Master. Is there any further comments? All in favor? Excellent. Motion carried. No unfinished business. We have anybody signed up for question period, Ms. Best?
Thank you, Mayor Law. I don't believe we have any, but I will do a first call for anyone who would like to submit a question to council. You may use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I will hold for a moment here. And seeing none, I'm going to call a second time. And seeing none, I'm going to call thrice, and we don't have any questions to council.
All right, then we'll go to item 15.1. I recommend that the meeting be closed to the public pursuant to sections 90(1) of the community charter to discuss matters related to A, personal information about an individual who holds or is being considered for position as an officer, employer, agent, and B, employee relations. Second by Councillor Master. All in favor? Motion is carried. We're moving into closed session.
Thank you.